Now, as Taiwo was talking, I noted down the main 3 points: stop the bleeding and the leakages, close the tax gap, and also lead by example and renew the social contract. And all of these tend to affect what the next speaker is going to be speaking about, and that is, of course, our small and medium enterprises, our small and medium businesses. They employ the most Nigerians, they employ the most Africans in any country across the continent, and it's very vital that we find ways to support them. We support them through fuel subsidy removal, we support them through the coming increase in electricity, we find ways to support them through VAT on diesel for those who may have diesel as part of their input. So how do we support the small and medium enterprises that are the fuel and the backbone of our economy? So the next conversation, the next speaker is going to be looking at mainstreaming SMEs growth in post-election environments. And my guest who's coming up now is Adenike Adeyemi. She's the executive director of the FATE Foundation, which is Nigeria's foremost business incubator and accelerator program for aspiring and emerging Nigerian entrepreneurs to start, grow, and even scale their businesses. So a quick background of Adenike before she comes on stage. She's a development sector expert with many years of expertise in non-profit administration, business development, education, as well as youth empowerment tactics. She directs the execution of the FATE Foundation's purpose in helping aspiring and developing Nigerian entrepreneurs to launch, expand, and scale in her capacity as the CEO. Please, a round of applause for Adenike Adeyemi. Please, let's keep the applause going as she comes to the stage.
Thank you very much. May I also add that I'm a very myself, we're very proud members of the board of budget. So I'll add that too. Great. So the good thing about following Abu and Taiwo is that your presentation is done. I was making a side joke to Abu that thank God I sent my presentation ahead because they'll just think that I copied and I added a number of things to it. So my job is very simple. Thanks again for this conversation, and I think that the way the conversations have been sequenced, they're very helpful to layer on what I want to talk about. I was asked to, please can we share my presentation? I was asked to speak on mainstreaming SME growth in a post-election environment, but I added an M to the SME because a lot of times when we say SME, and I'll go to that data later, if you look at the micro, small, and medium enterprise landscape in Nigeria, the percentage that we think are SMEs are not even up to 4%. And so it's always important for me to always say we're talking about micro, small, and medium enterprises in this conversation. Over the next 15 minutes, I'll talk broadly about the evolving Nigerian MSME landscape. I'll speak and share some data sets from our 2022 State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria report. I will also talk about the key issues that we need to address, and I think a lot of that has been emphasized by the two speakers earlier before me. And then because we're then doing signposting for the new administration, I will talk about what we feel from our standpoint, the work we do, the entrepreneurs we support, and really being right there within the ecosystem, what we feel are the important priorities to enable growth, to enable productivity for micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria. Thank you. Next slide, please. So, like I earlier mentioned, when we talk about Nigerian MSMEs, in fact, what happened last year, so the Small and Medium Enterprise Development Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, which is sort of the MDA that oversees small and growing business administration in Nigeria, they recently reclassified the data. So before we had micro, small, and medium enterprises, now we have nano, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And so when we look at that space, we have to, the way it's being reclassified now was because based on the previous surveys that had been done by the NBS and by SMEDAN, a large bucket was within micro category. And when they looked at those, about 90% of those within the micro category, a lot of them were individual-led businesses, so one man, one woman businesses. And so what they then did was added another category called nano businesses, which is for people who who either are self-employed and running their own enterprises, so one man, one woman-led ventures, or employ not more than 3 people in addition to themselves, or you're looking at the turnover from a less than 3 million revenue. And so that's the additional dynamic that was added. But if you look at that table below, I mean, over the years, so generally speaking, we still have largely micro businesses. We still have largely nano and micro businesses in Nigeria. They've ranged between, I mean, they've been at least 97%, so range between 99% to about 96% as at the last survey that was launched last year, or that was published last year. Interesting to see was that the small and medium enterprise segment grew slightly, about 2%, about 3%, so to speak, in the last one to, between the 2017 survey and also the 2021 survey. It's very diverse, it's very dynamic. It's still what I would call, because it's still largely informal, but there's a formality to the informality. And I think that that's something that we need to understand when we talk about micro and small businesses in Nigeria. Because a lot of the micro and small businesses, a lot of the nano and micro businesses that we engage with, they belong to associations, BMOs, trade groups, industry groups. Even if you look within the market setting, you see, no matter how localized they are, market associations and the like. And we believe that that's an untapped channel and community in terms of when you're talking about formalizing businesses that really, really needs to be harnessed. A lot of businesses grow within the communities, and there's a respect from the communal nature of that. And so when we start to talk about formalizing this informal sector, we have to say, where are the aggregation points? Where do we see them? Where do they find, Taiwo talked a lot about trust. Where are the centers of trust that exist? And then how can we expand and enable and challenge them to be formalized using a lot of those informal structures to which they derive support, knowledge, exchange, and all the like for. So we describe them as formal, informal businesses. We talk a lot about how small businesses, small and growing businesses in Nigeria create a lot of the jobs. And, sometimes people challenge that. And I always ask that from the 10 people that you know, young people that you know that were recently employed, you probably, and this is non-Lagos people, by the way, so maybe not necessarily people in this room, but if you ask people who are probably outside of major cities and the like, or maybe in peri-urban centers, who pays them? They're small businesses. 7 out of 10 people will tell you that it's somebody running a small business somewhere that is paying them full-time, part-time, informal, whatever way. That's how they are. And so that's why for me, even the job data, I don't even feel, if we probably even look at it a bit more, we'll see it even probably at 90%. And then, according to SMEDAN and NBS, there's a very strong contribution of almost 50% to the nominal GDP of the country. Another data set that I want us to go through is through our own research at the Faith Institute on the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria. And I will encourage you to download it on our research page. What we've been doing in the last 2 years, and we're launching the next one very soon, is to look at the entrepreneurial dynamic for small and growing businesses alongside a set of 5 indicators. We look at the business performance, so business mortality, growth, creation, and the like, how well it's doing from a revenue and performance perspective. We look at the ability of the entrepreneur to be able to acquire skills, to be able, whether it's financial management, financial literacy, and all the like, to be able to build the entrepreneurial skills and experience. We look at innovation and technology, and this is not in the very technical point, but really just baseline ability to use basic tools, basic technological information to be able to make decisions, or to be able to process transactions, operations, or banking and the like. We look at the perception of opportunities. How well do they feel that, they still want to continue to run a business despite the environment? And obviously, like the last 2 I've spoken on, we look at the enabling environment dynamic. Not surprising, the enabling environment dynamic, ranked lowest consistently, and I think the last 2 speakers have spoken a lot about that. But what is very surprising to us is that Nigerians, a lot of people still feel that there's so much opportunity in entrepreneurship. You know, I always joke around whenever we have to meet other people doing work course in other countries. Some of the questions people ask, how do you inspire a culture of entrepreneurship and innovation? You know, and I'm like, that's not our problem. We actually have to be discouraging people that it's not everybody that should be running a business, right? And so there's a high, in fact, even more than now, even despite the challenges of the environment, I know a number of people who have closed down businesses and will go and set up something else, right, to do that. And I think that that is such an unharnessed potential and opportunity in terms of just how people feel that there's opportunity to develop and grow their income and themselves, or even just provide and address the situation using entrepreneurial opportunities in Nigeria. The other interesting data for us, which obviously will not be surprising, is that we have a large number of young people, increasingly so, running businesses. So 80% of people that run businesses are between the ages of 15 to 39. A large part of that is people between 30 to 39. We're seeing a lot of people transitioning, whether by force, so maybe they were laid off or, you know, there are no more opportunities within the career path, into entrepreneurship. But we're also seeing a lot of people younger and starting earlier. When we started at Faith Foundation 23 years ago, up until 2016, we did not take, you had to have finished tertiary education to be able to take any of our programs, because we wanted you to get to a point where there was some stability for you to then start to think of running a business. In fact, from the first 10 years of our founding, about 50-60% of people would have spent about 3 to 5 years working in employment somewhere before then starting on the business. And then we then looked between 2014 and 2017, and we looked at the data, and we realized that most people that were coming in had actually started their businesses from school. So, and a number of them, about half of them will say that, well, they needed to augment their income, they needed to be able to pay for their school fees and pay for their upkeep. But that for us showed us something, right? That entrepreneurship was starting significantly younger and earlier. And so now, what I think this one then validated for us is that we really have to harness the demographic potential of young people who are more who may not be as experienced as people who are starting businesses earlier, and who really want to expand that, whether from an opportunity-driven or necessity-driven perspective, but that's something we've seen. And then last but not the least is that women are now up to 50% in running businesses. In fact, one of the data that was missing for us in the 2021 NBS Medan survey was the gender disaggregated part of the data. Because the 2017 survey showed that of the women that are within the micro, small, and medium enterprise segments, there were 44% that were playing generally. But from those that were playing there, only 22% were in the small and medium category. So that meant that, and that's less than a quarter. So that meant that most people that were running the businesses, women-led MSME businesses, were largely playing in the nano and micro space. Unfortunately, that data was not available for the one that was done last year. So next slide. So what are the key issues that, you know, that need to be resolved and need to be prioritized? Is that, yes, we have a lot of businesses. We have almost 40 million businesses, but they're very low growth. They're suboptimally unproductive. In fact, in a lot of cases, most of them probably should not be in business. They're very uncompetitive. So when sometimes when we're speaking with people who map programs for SMEs, even within sub-Saharan Africa, we really have to disaggregate the Nigerian SME data. Because when you're then saying SME, you're saying, no, the way, if you look at their year-on-year growth, their performance, their revenues, and everything that would lead to a productive small businesses, they really do not play in that space. And so, yes, we want to drive entrepreneurship growth, but without driving productive, competitive businesses across the board generally, we will still not be tapping the potential of small and growing businesses in terms of facilitating socioeconomic growth. The other thing which is very interesting for us to see, and I've been operating in this space for over 8 years now, And I can say that it's exciting to see how the ecosystem continues to expand within the micro, small, and medium enterprise space. A lot of people are coming in, first of all, recognizing that small businesses require specialized training, specialized support. You're working with somebody who's running their businesses. They don't have a CFO. They don't have a head of tax. They are the ones that will deal with the tax advisors themselves, do the financial management themselves, be the driver, be all in one in a lot of cases. And most times they're working with untrained hands. So it's great to see quite a lot of people coming into this space and supporting micro, small, and medium enterprises. But it's still very fragmented. It is not coordinated. And in a lot of cases, a lot of the efforts are in certain locations, primarily commercial centers, obviously, which you'll see. But, there needs to be more coordination and needs to be more enhancement with that. I've spoken in terms of what we're seeing in terms of more young people playing within the entrepreneurial space. But the challenge is then that their level of knowledge and understanding of what it takes to be able to build and grow a sustainable business is suboptimal and is lacking. A number of comments have also been made on the infrastructural deficits and gaps, and I'll speak to that. And then obviously what I've said on the challenging regulatory and business environment. Next slide. So this next slide is really where I would like to spend my time, and the keynote speaker had spent some time also delving into this, but I want to speak on it in a bit more detail. So if you ask us, what are the areas with which we need to prioritize MSME growth, particularly for this new administration? Where do we think that if efforts are concerted and there's a lot of investment into pushing the kind of growth and productivity we can see, where should they be? Number one, and it was good that, tax formed a very focal point of the conversations that we've had. If we think that people in Nigeria are challenged about tax payments, I can bet you that small and growing businesses are significantly over-challenged with that. There was supposed to be an interaction session that we're supposed to have with the Lagos State government before the elections, but it didn't happen. But we had then done an informal analysis or informal survey with a number of our businesses, not even just our businesses, but different business groups. And the number one challenge businesses spoke about was taxation. And, when Taiwo was listing out, he listed a number of the types of taxes, but I can tell you that those are not even the major taxes that a lot of our businesses pay. So yes, you have PIT, customs tax, CIT, and VAT and everything. But a lot of the taxes that businesses pay are the very informal ones, particularly at the state and the local government levies. Even for the women that just set up tables in the local markets where we go to, if you ask them, for that table, there's a tax. For that stand, there's a tax. There's tax for garbage removal and disposal. Within a particular week, they'll tell you that somebody is taking 1 or 2K from them, and in at least 20 or 30 points. And so for a number of our businesses within the agribusiness space, by the time we sat down with them, they were talking about 40 to 50 different levies, not tax, not any of the major taxes that we've spoken about, that they pay to different people. And so when we're talking about tax streamlining for somebody who is running a small and growing businesses, what are the things they want to answer? What tax am I paying? Who am I paying it to? When am I paying it? How am I paying it? Why am I paying it? Those 5 things are the things that really, really need to be addressed. And so that when we're having a tax conversation, we're not just having a tax conversation with the framing that the person that is paying this tax are people that have total tax divisions, or they have tax consultants that they can reach out to. But that they're the people that more often are the ones that really need to be the ones sorting out their own taxes, but are not in the place to be able to do that. And they're the ones that are paying the most of the taxes that we talk about, but whether they're accounted for or not accounted for. And a great thing Orelua is coming shortly after, because speaking around how we then use technology to make these processes for tax collection easy, simplified, and accessible in the most basic of technology areas. I know there have been a lot of improvements within the state and the federal inland revenues or internal revenues around how taxes should be made, but they're still very complicated for somebody who is running a small and growing business. So for us, that is number one priority in terms of streamlining and harmonizing the tax in a way that it's also easy and efficient for small businesses to understand all these different dynamics and facets for that. The second point is around regulatory cohesion. Because yes, on the one part, we need regulations around standardizations, protection, safety for goods and produce that are made, whether they're food products, health products, and the like. The challenge is that there are so many payment points. And, Abu talked about that. And one of the things for us that we've seen that has worked, and I'll even use Lagos as an example, is creating one-stop shop centers. Now, a lot of these things have to be state-driven and local government-driven, not even federal-driven. So I think when we also talk about prioritizing MSME growth, productivity, and enablement, we need to separate the role of the federal government and also the role of the state and the local government. But we cannot overemphasize what one-stop shops can do. So within a space, within the local government area, you're able to do everything from registration, license processing, even the information around understanding what you need to do at every point there is capacitated at that local level. When people ask me personally which of the funding programs that I think have been the most efficient and effective from a government funding program for MSMEs, I always point to the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. And I say that because of the point that I'll make around number 5. That fund was very clear about who it was designing for and who it was not designing for. It was very clear about what that handshake of the funding will do with employment creation. It was very clear about learning and growing and scaling from that learning. It was very clear about pivoting when there were situations and challenges, right? Like COVID or like when there were vandalizations during in October of 2020. But one of the other things that was very effective was localizing support systems within local governments. So if you needed to get LASRA and you didn't know how to go to for LSCTF, you could go to a local government to be able to do it. If you needed to understand how to apply, because in a number of cases the application was online, but you didn't have access to internet data or even a data-enabled phone, you could apply. And this is something that we can take, we can learn, we can explore, expand, and scale. Because at the end of the day, all these things, because yes, we want regulation, we want formalization of small businesses, but you have to meet businesses where they are. Yes, ideally, we want them to be able to go online and be able to do everything that they can do, but we're not there yet. And by the way, a lot of the online platforms and portals are not seamless. They are challenged. They're down half of the time. And you will still need to have a manual part or go in person to the process. And so when we're able to, first of all, have a way where there's a cohesiveness around all the regulatory requirements that anybody starting and growing a small business needs in one point, and there's the capacity at that level to be able to address that, we will go a long way even in talking about formalization. One of the things that is important is also making sure, and I'm happy we talked about the capacity of the civil service. We cannot have people who are making laws and who are also within the civil service who are not entrepreneurial in their thinking, who do not understand the value of time, who do not understand why a process needs to be shortened, streamlined, made efficient, and straightforward. And so beyond just saying we want to expand the entrepreneurial thinking of people who want to run businesses, I think we need to expand the entrepreneurial thinking of people who are making the policies and regulations to be able to support or are advocating for regulation of the small and growing business space. The third part is around sectoral optimization. I think that there are a lot of programs that have been designed but do not understand like the complexity and the dynamics of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. And understanding that, yes, even when we have priority sectors, whether, and you know the typical priority sectors, we talk about services, agribusiness, you know, manufacturing, creatives, and all the different elements, is that you have to optimize and you have to make your programs, your policies, built around the dynamics, the cash flows of the sectors that they're in. And you then develop those programs based on that. Because the way you will do and you will fund and you design a program for a tomato business in Jos will be very, very different from, you know, how you look at another kind of similar business in another sector in the southwest part. So really understanding the positioning and the competitive advantage of a lot of the sectors and then developing and creating programs from a parallel and sector product need is very, very important as a priority. And that then speaks to when we also do programs around credit, around access to market. And it was very instructive that we didn't have, oh, you have to solve access to credit, access to market, and the like. Because when you facilitate the environment, credit is easier to access. There are other things that we didn't even point out here. One of it is the movable collateral registry bill. And needing to expand and learn from that. Have people been able to use the movable collateral registry bill to be able to register their movable collateral and also have the collateral that is not landed assets that would then form as an element to be able to enable them raise financing? Same thing with markets too. From an infrastructural gap perspective, one of the things that, you know, has been strongly recommended, and we've seen that with a lot of what we're seeing around free trade zones and centers, is co-locating opportunities and resources. One of the states in the South did very well around this, where they created MSME cluster zones, where if you are producing, for instance, anything that had to do with rubber, whether you're supplying, whether you needed machines, if you needed energy, if you needed to even buy and purchase like nylon, paper bags or plastic bags rather from there, you could go there. And those things help because you're clustering around sectors, you're providing infrastructure, resources, equipment around that. You that you want to provide financing or you have financing products can also go there, address. The person who is running the business can locate their businesses there, and the people that they're selling to can then come and trade from there. So really looking at the comparative advantages and the opportunities around co-locating for sectoral opportunities. The fourth point is around harnessing demographic dividends. And I think I've talked a bit about really specializing support based on ages of businesses, experiences of businesses, but even gender dynamics and gender perspectives. If we want more and more businesses who are female-led within the small and medium enterprise space, we really need to also then pay attention to that and say, how can we enable more women within growth financing that will get them beyond the nano and micro stage to the small and medium enterprise stage? And then last but not the least, which probably I think for me addresses everything, is around incremental learning. I think there's no space in Nigeria that we've had a lot of programs and initiatives unlike the MSME space. There are countless funding programs that are available. We did a study of some of the recent ones last year. But the problem we keep having is that we're not learning. We're first of all not even designing. We're not putting on a design thinking hat on to say, you know, for these programs, what do we want to have at the end of the day? What kind of jobs do we want to create? How do these programs align with the growth trajectory of the country and where we want our priorities to be? What are the types of small and medium and micro businesses that we want to develop? How do we want to see them expand? Once we launch a program, what has worked and why? What didn't work and why? And then how can we scale from the ones that were getting lessons? And so that when we're investing, when we're saying we're putting together a 1 billion naira fund for the agri sector, for micro, small, and medium enterprises, what is the return on the investment that we want from that fund, social and economic-wise, and how do we continue to track that? And I really hope that this is something that the new government will definitely prioritize. My last slide is around saying that we're trying to build a resilient economy. we're trying to look at our macroeconomic fundamentals. We're talking about issues around revenue generation. If we don't put small businesses at the center of what I've said, we need to create a business plan that is centered around small and growing businesses, we won't get anywhere. We teach businesses to develop business plans. When somebody is starting a business, you say, who are you targeting? Why are you targeting them? How can you be sure that they are paying for they can pay for your products and services? How do we project your growth in the mid to long term? We need to take the same heart in terms of addressing the micro, small, and medium enterprise space. We need to ask ourselves, how do we develop and create competitive businesses? Yes, we have one of the highest number of small and growing businesses in the world, but are they really growing? We need to say that in the next 3 to 5 years, if we're going to have so number of small and growing businesses, we need to be able to say this is the way we will see that growth and projection. We can start with this number of micro businesses this year, but we want to see a certain percentage of them that are small and medium enterprises in the next 3 to 5 years. We've talked a lot, we had a lot of talk about census in the last 6 months, but we don't have a census of businesses. There's no information, there's no business data information, whether informal or formal, for us to be able to even say that this is where this business was. And that's one of the things we always challenge with the NBS data, to say that, yes, we see the growth trajectory of the business, micro growth, micro, small, and medium enterprise growth over the years, but we can't say these were the businesses that died. These were the businesses that transitioned to a small category. These were the businesses from a small category that went back to a medium, to a micro or a nano category. So we really need to spend time and invest in understanding the type of businesses that we're positioning the country to be, and match our plans for job creation and employability to that. Because one of the things also is around how do we also make sure that we have businesses that can employ our underemployed and unemployed young people. And a lot of small and growing businesses really are primed to be able to mop up a lot of those unemployment and underemployment data. And so once we have a clear trajectory, if you think of the graph that the keynote speaker showed about, where he talks about developing countries and high-income countries, and that investment in small and medium enterprise businesses, that's where it is. That's where you get the innovation. That's where you get the spurring of local economic growth. That's where you get a lot of jobs that are created. There is no... whenever there are elections in places like America, where does the president visit? High streets, factories, restaurants, because they understand the importance of ensuring that businesses are shored up to be able to service the local communities that they are in. And I feel that it's time for us to move from mouth speak to really investing in policies and programs to really enhance micro, small, and medium businesses in Nigeria. And I really hope that the current administration will take advantage of that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Adenike, Executive Director of the Faith Foundation. So as she was talking, of course, a few things that we heard, it sounds good. We have some of the highest rates of female entrepreneurship in the world, but what does that really mean? Questioning how many of our SMEs are truly SMEs versus being macro or nano. Now, women accounts for 41% ownership of micro businesses, with 23 million female entrepreneurs operating in the space. But what's the value? What's the actual tangible value of that? And how many of them can we expect to scale up and find their place in contributing to Nigeria's progress and, of course, our economic development? But these conversations, one thing you said at the very beginning, they've been stacked up to sort of lead into one another. And from a conversation that's looking at mainstreaming SME growth in post-election environments, we want to take a bit more of a deeper look into an area around that, which of course has to do with inclusion and innovation. So When we talk about inclusion, a lot of us think of it in gender aspects, but there's a massive gendered aspect to inclusion. But inclusion is not just gender. It's also about youth. It's also about disabilities. It's also about making sure that those who are traditionally marginalized and left out are brought into the conversation. And one way I can emphasize that is with the recent elections in Nigeria. So let me just give me a quick minute to do this. For the State Houses of Assembly 2023 elections, 993 state assembly seats, over 10,000 total candidates, just over 1,000 female candidates. At the end, 57 women were elected. 5.7% women's representation, and there are actually 14 states in Nigeria that have no female member as of right now. And 5 states have never had a female member or female elect member since 1999. So it's not just about the state houses of assembly. This goes even further up. Only 3 women were elected to serve as senators in 2023. And only 17 women were elected to serve in the 360-member House of Representatives. This is a country that's almost evenly split down the middle when it comes to gender, but it's not represented at the highest levels, and it's not represented at various different levels as well.